Welcome to Clothing Culture. I'm Emily Lane.
I'm Bret Schnitker.
We speak with experts where we explore the global dynamics that shape trends in the fashion industry.
Brought to you by Stars Design Group, a global production and design house with over 30 years of industry experience.
Welcome back to another episode of Clothing Culture. Today, I am joined by Bret Schnitker, my partner in crime on this podcast. Welcome, Bret.
Thanks, Emily. Welcome.
And I know we have a very special guest planned today. Who are we talking to?
We're talking with Jon Lewis. He's one of the founders of the world's most technologically advanced knitting factories and happens to be located right here in St. Louis. So it should be a really interesting conversation.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, Jon, I know you kind of have a long history in the apparel industry. Can you just give us a little brief background about where you came from? Because I know it's not St. Louis.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'm very old, so this might take a while, right? So, no, actually, I went to the University of Michigan, never thinking I'd ever be in retail.
Who does?
Yeah, who does, right?
Right.
We all start out at this weird place.
Right.
And I actually moved to St. Louis right out of college to work for Famous Bar.
Oh my
department
gosh.
store. Yeah,
so this is almost a coming home for you.
Yeah, and it's really strange. I mean, 37 years later, I move a block away from my old apartment, right?
Oh,
to come back to St. Louis.
wow.
But took a long journey in between there, though. I was a department manager and a buyer, and then kind of went on the wholesale side, selling to buyers. And that took me all over the United States, first to Chicago, then LA, then San Francisco, and eventually New York, as I got ever, increasing roles of responsibility. And, eventually got to C-level and, senior VP, president, CEO. And
Really climbed your way to the top.
yeah, it took a while to do it. But, I had some interesting times. I mean, I always bounced between this whole idea of being an entrepreneur, starting my own company, which I did 3 different times. And then went back to the corporate world, saying, I want to go back to the corporate world. And said, no, I can't stand
Seeking
this.
a little security once again
Yeah.
after being an entrepreneur.
And then you kind of
It
jump
can
off.
be brutal. We need some nurturing time in between ventures, right?
And then you jump off the cliff again and go do it. But, through all that work, it's taken me all over the world and from factories and sourcing and design and working with great brands and multiple categories. So it's been a great experience. It kind of gave me a unique perspective and training and seasoning for what I'm doing now, because we're really venturing into uncharted territory, right? And I think you need to be able to pull from multiple disciplines and multiple mindsets and, emotional skills to do a startup manufacturing, project. And my business partner and I, Jon Lewis, who's had, similar background, a little bit more on the supply side, chain supply area. So, where I've been more on the commercial stuff. We know enough about each other's functionalities to be dangerous, right?
Right.
So it's a good yin and yang team, but it takes a unique skill set and a good amount of seasoning to kind of do what we're doing. So it's not an easy thing.
So the U.S. abdicated manufacturing quite a while ago, back in the 80s. We've talked
The
about
most
this
of it
a few
anyway.
times.
Sure.
Right. And, you talked about traveling the world to get firsthand experience to see manufacturing. What made you decide, let's bring manufacturing back to the U.S.?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something we get asked a lot. And I think it's something that kind of evolved over time, right? So, again, I'm old enough and been in this business long enough to have been working with U.S. manufacturers when they were still here in a major way and saw the shift. And, I think a couple things, obviously it was the labor costs, that was one of the driving factors. But it was also the unwillingness of U.S. manufacturing, regardless of the category, to reinvest in capital and reinvest capital in technology and new ways of doing things, right? And I think that was as much as a bellwether of why manufacturing moved offshore, as opposed to just the pure labor costs, and plus the ease of doing business. So, to give you an example, I think when new factories started to pop up in China, there was nothing there. So what did they do? They just bought everything new. There's no legacy systems of anything. They bought the latest technology of whatever and made this, in the middle of rural China, they're out of the ground. There's this phoenix of this, high-tech, fabulous manufacturing facility. And so they were able to compete on many levels, some unfairly with, suppression of the currency and government involvement, whatever.
That's not happening.
That's not happening. But a lot of things they did right just because they leapfrogged, the technology piece of it. And then I think also they made it because it was so difficult to, for U.S., or brands and people in the U.S. to do business overseas. They made it very easy for you, right? So your walk says, please just give me tech pack and we can work on it for you, where I think manufacturing and in my day, back in the days, was you had to go buy the fabric from a converter and go find the buttons and then go find the zippers and send it all to another place to sew it and put it all together. Well, that was a lot of work. It was a lot easier just to go to 2 or 3 different factories and say, you figure it out, give me the best price and deliver products. So,
and I think with the loss of manufacturing in the U.S., we lost technical skills to go with that.
Absolutely. So a lot of that technology, whatever technology we had and that learning and that seasoning just kind of went away. And I think some industries, like the car industry, kind of learned their lesson. They shut a lot of jobs, but they automated and kind of brought back, a lot of robotics and were able to kind of reestablish or create what, their version of manufacturing in the United States.
But cars also cost a hell of a lot more than they used to, too.
Absolutely.
Apparel hasn't had that luxury too much.
No, that's very true. You're talking like it's a lot easier to invest in big ticket items as far as, manufacturing. So I think for us, it really became an idea of really, though, is really, as everything is, always driven by the consumer, right? Because I think once the consumer started buying differently, he or she, they're buying online and direct from brands, and that really changed, how you, how you thought about the supply chain and where manufacturing should be. I think it was interesting. I went to Kent State in Ohio as a great fashion program, and they actually train people in our category, right? So I went to give a couple lectures and talks, and I got up in front of the Retail 101 class, and full auditorium, and I said, first thing I asked was, who's been to a Macy's in the last 2 years?
No hands.
Yeah.
Crickets, no matter what. So the whole idea of how people are buying has changed, and so what that has allowed are new brands to emerge with a relatively low cost of entry to start. They can really craft their message. They can really be authentic. They can drive an emotional connection to their consumer. They don't have to worry about in-store promotions at Bloomingdale's or Nordstrom's or Macy's or whatever, and have to, they can circumvent those, gateways of getting product to the consumer. But what it didn't give them was a supply chain that met their needs. If you're going to have that kind of reaction to demand and want to connect with your consumer, you don't need a 18-month product cycle doing production overseas. And
how do you go through that conversation with a client? Again, we talk about being ancients in this business. It's so weird. Time has flown.
Right.
Time's supposed to fly when you're having fun.
I know.
Not all of it being fun, but when we sit here and we talk about that, the traditional method is, for a retailer or a brand, look, I have a really high markup because I'm expecting a certain amount to be sold at regular price, certain amount to be discounted. As buyers, we were both buyers in the industry. We either overbought or underbought. We never bought the right amount. So they assume a certain percentage will be marked down and liquidated at a loss. Absolutely. So that whole calculation ends up with kind of their net profit projection versus kind of this gross retail profit projection. In your model, you are creating this kind of dynamic new shift where you're saying, look, the old days of overbuying or underbuying, you really can buy to demand with your business, and we'll get into that a little bit. And so therefore, you don't have all of these. You can buy less quantity. You can buy more focused. And then when business takes off, if things are organized correctly from a fiber standpoint in your factory, you can react to demand. Therefore, every piece, in theory, you could be selling at regular price directly to the consumer in the right size that's needed.
Right. Absolutely.
Correct?
No, correct. Yeah.
So you kind of your maintained profit margin for the company, the net profit could really be, you have this great ability to sit there and dialogue where, nearshoring, and it is still going to be a little more expensive in the U.S. than it is overseas, but the value opportunity of reacting to demand, if a style takes off, you can chase that style. If you buy it and it doesn't really work, you're not deep in inventory as losses.
Sure. Absolutely. So I think, we definitely go there. I think we usually start though with having them understand how we're structured and how we're set up, because most brands and teams and buying teams right now do not have the infrastructure themselves to do domestic sourcing and things like that. So they're built for overseas, kind of sourcing.
You would think it'd be
working.
easier.
You think it'd be easier, but they have in their mind that I got to go find fabric. How do I do all this? So basically, we start by saying working with Evolution St. Louis is just like going over to overseas and working with a factory in China or Bangladesh or anyplace else, except that we're in St. Louis, right? And as far as costs go, when you compare landed duty price to landed duty price, we're within 5% of overseas manufacturing, Asian manufacturing, and definitely more competitive than European manufacturing now. And we always qualify that by saying our focus is really in the contemporary, advanced contemporary, better designer luxury categories in fashion. So we're not focusing on the Kohl's business or, big mass, big box retailers. But that's okay. A lot of the brands we work with don't want to work with factories who focus there anyways.
Sure.
Because they know that's where all their bread and butter is.
And for a lot of those brands on the coast, Midwest is kind of like China.
Yeah,
right? We're way the hell away from
it's like
anything
the picture
they
of
know.
Manhattan. It's
You're
like
not in my borough.
It's like the whole world over past the East River.
That's right,
So I think though when we talk about that, it's just like working with the overseas factory stuff that's here. We're competitive on pricing. Then we start to talk about all those value-added things.
Yeah.
And guess what? Here's what's different, though. If you wanted to have sweaters deliver for $925, 2021, you don't have to do your concept development in July or May, June, July of 2020.
So it's a quicker development cycle for you.
Yeah. So basically, you can actually
basically 9/1/2021, right?
Yeah.
Maybe not that fast.
Yeah. Fast.
Yeah.
But I think and then the conversation, they have to book production usually in August or September of 2020 for that same time delivery. They're booking production a year out if they're looking, trying to get the best, trying to make sure, Chinese New Year and all that other fun stuff. So, I think one of the things that happens is that we say to them, you can actually get through the season and then finalize your concept development for the next season.
Yeah.
And still book production and still, and therefore you are closer to demand. So,
and in season you can react to demand, which was never
right. And when you
really
put it in practical
possible.
terms like that, they're like, wait a second, what? What? It's almost like this, they can't even believe it. And then you talk about all the things you mentioned about, designing closer to market, being closer to consumer, take a position on yarn. It all starts with yarn in our world,
That's probably the biggest thing that someone's got to
Right.
really grapple with is the amount of kgs they're going to buy in yarn
Right.
in a particular
We're just
style.
picking out the yarn and understanding their lead times because that's something we don't have control over, right? So
Yeah. How has freight impacted all of that lately?
out of China, it's been pretty difficult,
Yeah.
But, there's a
You're
lot
still
of...
bringing a lot from Europe and Italy?
Yeah,
or-
there's a lot of pushback for, at least in the better category from, yarns coming out of China. They still use it, of course.
Yeah.
But there's certain mills that we're using there that are very responsible and have great, organic product as well, too. But a lot of work here domestically in Turkey and Italy.
So you were talking about, kind of helping younger brands, who have a more intimate relationship with their consumer. I'm thinking about a lot of the younger brands that we talk with here at Stars, and so often it can be a challenge to help a younger brand understand the minimums that they need to really obtain to make, going to a more of a full-blown production actually viable. You've talked, Bret, about what it takes for a factory to set up their lines and get you in the queue. And so there has to be some sort of minimum to make it
There's a lot of
worth
dynamics
that.
at play. We talk about, people want socially compliant factories and sustainability.
Right.
And these new brands certainly are really focused on a lot of those, the Gen Z brands.
Sure, of course.
And when you kind of go overseas, you've been there, the really, really small factories have a tough time being compliant.
Yeah, I'm curious, is it in, with the technology that you've embraced, is it viable to do smaller production, or does it operate in a very similar cycle that it would for?
No, I don't. It's an interesting proposition because our factory was built to do 300 units, 3,000 units, or 30,000 units.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Purposefully. So even when we talk about big brands, the big brands you think of, not everything they do is like 50,000 units or 15,000 units. They want to try new innovation things too. They want to do 500 units of something or 1,000 units of something or 300 units of something. And that's where they've really fallen down in the past because they haven't been able to innovate.
Can't test and react, and they're
They can't
afraid
test
to
and
buy the
react.
units.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they just don't. Right. So then their brands get stale and they get worried about it. So they're hungry. We get as much outreach from major brands as we do from small emerging brands. On small emerging brands, they've had difficulty getting into the knit category because it's hard to find a factory who'll do 300 units of anything.
Big time
Right.
for sure.
Right.
Knitting. Yeah.
Overseas or whatever. So, and you can't really, and there's no place in the United States to do small batch anything like you can do in cut and sew.
Right.
And with yarn, you kind of have to take a position on yarn, or at least know what you're talking about with yarn. You can't just go buy a bunch of fabric and go down your basement and cut some patterns and
Sure.
talk to your friend who you went to fashion school with and sew it together and put it out there on the internet. You just can't do it,
And
right?
being a knit guy, probably people would argue with me, but I would say that knits are more technical than wovens. So when you're putting together a design for your particular factory,
Sure.
that can also be a little daunting because it is more technologically advanced, and you've got some support functions in your factory, designers and developers to really support that.
No,
right?
no, true. I mean, if you think about the knitting process, it's like 3D printing. You program it and then you print something work on a computer and you print it on a 3D printer. This is like 3D knitting, same process.
Okay.
We take the tech packs and the concepts and everything we get from our brands and our customers. We have a technical design team that interprets that and puts that into, computer form. We do the algorithms, and then that's the programming that drives the machines. And the machines, it's like Willy Wonka. Yarn goes in one end and a sweater or a garment comes out the other.
So this is truly whole garment knitting.
Yeah, it can be. I mean, we do knit. We still have the ability to knit in panels and link things together, which is
Probably not as efficient as the full whole garment.
it's definitely not. And I think that's where, we work with our brand partners and say, listen, you may have done a sweater overseas. Even the big brands, it really is, at the end of the day, a cut and sew sweater because it's just a bunch of knit panels sewn together, linked
Right.
together. So we say, let's take a shot at re-engineering it using our technology and what our machines can do and see if we can either make it whole garment where it knits in one piece, or we can limit some of the panels that we're doing. Maybe it's just we're just linking out a collar instead of the whole, 5 different pieces together. So, I think we always work with our brands and our customers and say, give us a chance to re-engineer this and take advantage of our technology and see what we can do to, make the production more efficient. And so when we look at, our minimums are relatively low. They're 300 units per style, not style color or size or anything. So we usually see the limitations on minimums from the yarn suppliers. But we work with a lot of yarn suppliers that have stock programs and can do surcharges on, smaller, dye lots and things like that. So there's usually a good workaround, but that allows emerging brands to kind of get into the category to start with. They're like, oh my, we can do it now. And major brands to say, wow, we can actually expand knits.
Sure.
Because unless they really knew they had a winner, then they weren't going to really do the development, the time, and the energy to kind of go and develop that overseas.
Thinking about how people are used to seeing knits in, you're talking about linking everything together. You're used to seeing seams here and so forth. Are you finding that kind of the tradition of the past, it can be a difficult leap for people to get their head around aesthetically what it would look like to knit something from, this sleeve to that sleeve without the seams? Like, are you coming up against that?
we can use the technology to replicate all those things. We make garments that look like they were hand knit. They're done in one piece. And we can have the seaming and the collars and everything that looks like a traditional sweater. It's just done in one piece. It's not linked together. So actually we can replicate all those features that you see and that look like they were made by hand or by piece or by old school, knitting. We could just replicate that all automatically, right?
Yeah.
And automate that whole process. So it really gives a lot of freedom of design. In fact, with shaping and different things we could do, it actually, even seasoned knit designers don't know what these machines can do. So there's a lot of collaboration, a lot of education and talking about. There's just every time we work with a brand, they're like, you can't believe you built it. What? You did it? And that it's here and that it's on scale and that, we're expanding, and the fact that they can't even believe in what the technology can really do now. They've never really had that exposure to it. So it's really an opportunity, and that's why we focus on the better brands, because those brands can really take advantage of the technology. I mean, making a basic $19.99 sweater for Walmart or whatever, you can make that any place. You don't need to make that here or use these machines. So
Yeah. So you selected STOLL as your technology partner. Can you tell us a little bit about why you selected them as a partner and, what else is out there in this space?
Sure. Well, there's 2 major suppliers, STOLL, based out of Germany, and then Shimaseki, based out of Japan. And both have their features and benefits. The Shimaseki, make a lot of high-end apparel. They kind of started on the glove business, and they have just some great, wonderful machines.
The recent version makes sushi, I think.
Right, exactly. Right.
Automatically,
So,
whole garment sushi.
I wish. Let's get one.
We would have bought one.
Yeah, right? So, but I think that, a lot of their their software is proprietary, right? And closed, right? So you really have to be an expert to use their software. And there's not a lot of training for it, things like that too. And you have to buy different machines for different things. Where STOLL has a much more universal and flexible, what it can work on. I mean, we found that a lot of our business is now and going forward going to be in technical textiles. And we're talking automotive applications, medical applications, military, all different kinds of shoes, shoe uppers. They're all the Nike Flyknit was initially developed on a STOLL machine. So, if you look at all the different categories, the machines are much more versatile. We can make a sweater in the morning and a shoe in the afternoon type thing. Well, not necessarily true, but kind of, had that kind of flexibility. And so, and also, there's a lot of programs out there, educational-wise, that teach STOLL programming, the M1 Plus programming, and they're just a great company to work with. Not that Shimaseki's not. They've been really aggressive. They've been very aggressive.
They're committed to building this.
5 years ago, we said to them that we did a joint, kind of a joint venture and a press announcement that over the next 5 years, we're going to buy 300 machines and be their face in the U.S. market, because they were looking for a way to break in the U.S. market in a meaningful way. And we talked about our plan and the vision we have for what we're doing. They were like, you guys are the first one to kind of get it, and maybe have a shot at making this happen. So they gave us a lot of support to the point, training, development, their entire library of product, bringing people over once COVID's over, bringing people over from Germany to work in the factory.
Wow.
Do all our training. So just very aggressive. And, we are their face in America. And guess what? We're on track to meet that 300 machine purchase. We bought 32 machines out of the box. I mean, no one does that. No one does startup manufacturing by buying 32, machines that cost $100,000 to $180,000 and each. And then, we can fit another 20 or so in our current facility. And we've had so much outreach and so much customer demand. We've already leased another 130,000 square foot facility in St. Louis that'll hold another roughly 240 machines.
Wow.
And so the over 40 machines, fastest production, about how many sweaters is that going to knit a year? Average.
Yeah, our capacity is about 25,000 sweaters a month. So we so
there you go. That's quite capacity.
Yeah,
and then when you scale up to this big plant, it's
really
massive.
A lot of it on the capacity, it's hard because a lot of it depends if you're making a mask. That's one.
Complexity of the sweater knit and details.
Or whatever.
Yeah.
So,
how long does it take to knit the most basic sweater on one of those machines?
It could be anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes, So
pretty incredible.
It's pretty incredible.
And my understanding is that kind of one operator can manage how many machines?
12 machines, right?
One operator, 12 machines.
Yeah, so
that sounds pretty robotic.
Yeah, exactly.
Is this replacing humankind in labor?
To a certain level. I mean, on one hand, it's like in the old days, you're doing hand knit machines, you'd have to have a lot of labor making, but when the jobs that we have at our factory, they're good jobs. I mean, you can make you don't have to have a 4-year degree to, run these machines. It's a very technical job. You do need training and associate's degree, but you can go to Rankin Tech or some of the other technical schools out there. And, it pays well. It pays well. I mean, and you can, in St. Louis, you can raise a family off these. And,
right.
We pay for all our employees' benefits. And we just have this really kind of holistic approach to the employees we have. We just really want to take care of them because there's a lot of training and development that goes into working with them. We want to make sure that they're happy, healthy, and working hard for us, right?
Yeah.
And, you could say that, it's not a lot. It's 50 jobs, in our current facility. It'll be about 150 to 180 in our new facility, but they're high-paying jobs, paying sustainable wages, great work environment, and, they're net new jobs. They didn't exist here before.
I think that's the point that people get lost on technology, and they get worried that, robots and computers are taking our jobs. You've developed an opportunity to build a business in the United States that didn't exist before, wouldn't exist without this technology, and you can actually have a plan in place to scale it where more and more jobs are created.
Absolutely.
And I believe that as that scales, because we've had other conversations about this, the ecosystem around that is going
Absolutely.
to grow, creating more jobs.
Right. No, we've already talked about that in the category. I mean, listen, St. Louis at one time used to be the largest manufacturer of shoes and apparel outside of New York, right? So we've talked about, we're doing a lot of shoe development, not totally altruistic, but can we attract a shoe assembly company or a shoe company that actually manufactures in the U.S. to build manufacturing in St. Louis, using the same technologies and advancements and incentives that we got to build that here. All of a sudden, that you start to create that ecosystem. Can we get? We're already working with the infrastructure on U.S. Spinning, yarn suppliers. Could we eventually locate that from these small, old, kind of mills that are basic in North Carolina? Can we, do a high-tech modern one in St. Louis, and all of a sudden, to your point, you build this whole infrastructure, an ecosystem here, and creating all these great jobs, and they're all net new.
Right.
Right. It's not just really low scale, $8 an hour, whatever it is.
And you mentioned St. Louis being kind of the second largest producer at one point outside of New York, and I get the same question: why the hell are you in St. Louis? Why aren't you on the coast? I'm from California or from New York, and we end up here. For you, why St. Louis?
Yeah, well, we started our whole project in New York, of course, and looked there, and then $55 a square foot on the bad side of town. We're not going to manufacture anything there. Yeah. And I think even in New York, the idea that it's like this manufacturing center, that there's a big garment center, is kind of a myth now. I mean, it's proven. For sure. Definitely post-COVID, it's not. And so, we looked at where else to relocate, and we looked at North Carolina and Arkansas and those type of places. And, that was kind of like old school, a converter, shotgun shuttle, all that other fun stuff that just not relevant anymore. We kind of really looked at where more the industrial belt, the Rust Belt, that was really more, attractive where we are. And, being from Michigan, we looked at Michigan and had a lot of contacts there. And we were pretty far down the road and about ready to sign a lease. And, that's when we met Susan Sherman and the people from the St. Louis Fashion Fund and brought us.
And they did kidnap your family and hold them hostage till you moved.
And basically held us for ransom for
just kidding. Sorry.
No, but came to St. Louis,
Susan.
and I knew the ecosystem here because I used to live here, right? And we'd come back here for market and for May Company and different things. So we kind of knew St. Louis as this kind of historical fashion town. So it wasn't a big stretch for us to take a hard look at it. But it was definitely the ability to walk in and kind of see what was already here. Stars Design was already here. We walked into this place like, oh my God, this is here, And, Claris is here, and there's a lot of, shoe company and a lot of really great California manufacturing is based here. So there's a lot of things, companies, Somersault, which is a new emerging swim brand, is based here. So there's a lot of stuff going on here. And I think having a manufacturing anchor was one of those pieces of the puzzle that would help put St. Louis on the map. So we had this wonderful outreach and just welcoming into the St. Louis. It was like, of course we're staying, right?
Yeah, and technology is absolutely growing here. So you've got that fit between the fashion community and the growing technology sector that's thriving. And of course, you talked about it a moment ago of really the quality of life that your employees can have.
Oh, sure, absolutely. And I think personally for me, I always joke, that St. Louis is like New York at 70 off, and that we have all the great restaurants and
who doesn't want a deal,
exactly,
right?
right? So, I'll go to dinner sometimes like, this is the bill? Did you charge me enough? But, it's simple things like quality of life. Like Forest Park is bigger than Central Park, but the biggest difference is there's only like 400,000 people using it, not 10 million, to get Manhattan. So, I think there's a real push on both coasts. It's like, I want a simpler way of life, but they don't want to give up the culture and the sophistication and the arts and sports and all that other fun stuff that they have there. And you don't have to here. Yeah. You basically have it all. It's just like this hidden gem.
And I think it's really growing. I think we have support from a lot of factors. I think, the Cortex, which is that central corridor that's got all that tech center, and the growth there. We've got large companies moving back from the coast there because the cost of living is so much more affordable.
Sure.
The reality is apparel, depending on the sector you're in, really hasn't increased in retail cost in a number of years. So we're always somewhat pressured on cost.
No, true.
And so, providing the value that the Midwest has here in an interconnected world, why not?
Well, it's a great point. We looked at the business model, just on paper as how do we make this work? And obviously human capital is going to be important, right? We need well-trained workers. We're not going to have fewer of them, but they're net new jobs. We better, we need a trainable workforce, and that's something the U.S. can offer. And at what we could pay, which is a good rate and a good pay, you could live well in St. Louis. I think the other thing we looked at is that because of the technology and what we can do, the thing that we needed most was capital and electricity. And that's really what the U.S. has the cheapest thing from a commodity standpoint, the cheapest to offer, the cheapest capital in the world, and electricity base as well too. So if we can,
and here we take that for granted. Everywhere else in the world, it is a line item that everyone watches.
Right,
like
I can't build a factory because I can't turn the power on, or I can't get people to train,
or it's so
whatever.
expensive.
So for us, it was kind of a no-brainer, and I think because the community here and the business community and the social community and the retail community and every part of it understood the fashion business, they could really help us.
Right.
My favorite line is, it really takes .com, .org, .edu, and .gov all working together to do true economic development. And that's what we found here. I think St. Louis, to give, kind of compliment to the entire city and every facet of it, is probably one of the only cities we found in the entire country that does that well.
Right.
Brings all those pieces together. And that's an unusual mix, and we didn't find that in a lot of those cities we were looking for. And no slam against them, it just wasn't their. They just haven't gotten it yet. And I think here in our category, what we're doing, they did, and they do.
That's great. Before we wrap this conversation.
We have to stop. I'm just having fun now. I'm just getting warmed up. I didn't do this all night, So everyone come to St. Louis, come take a tour.
That's
it's all
right.
good, So.
A conversation that we are involved in almost daily is the sustainable conversation.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And I believe that the technology that you have embraced has a really wonderful sustainable story. Can you help shed a little light on that?
Absolutely. Well, I think one thing the consumer is demanding sustainability now, and I think rightly so. At the same time, that same consumer is saying, I don't want to wear this hemp sack and charge me $400 for it.
Right.
Right. So there has to be that kind of blending of giving me a product I want to buy, but it's got to be sustainable too. So that's a pretty tall order for overseas manufacturing, and a lot of brands coming out to it.
It's a tall order for anyone.
Yeah, big or small. Emerging brands support emerging brands. The larger brands know they have to be relevant. This is how they have to do. And this whole idea of fast fashion and stuff has kind of gone away. People are saying,
talking slow fashion, intentional fashion.
Yeah, I want to have a sweater for 10 years. Then I'll buy 2 of them. But I don't need 40 of them that are going to last a year.
Right.
So I think that there's a lot of conversations like that. But good business and sustainability have to merge, right? It can't be a mutually exclusive conversation. I think that's what we've achieved with what we do. We have a very green carbon footprint, with our factory. We produce less than 3% waste. We took an existing building, so we didn't demolish it and build something new. We took something distant, but took it out to the bricks, put all new lighting, wiring, everything, so made it a green building. We could put our factory next to a hospital, a school, a playground, it doesn't matter, right? So, and still, be viable and be part of the community. So there's no smokestacks or smelting or anything like that. How we produce, like I said, it is sustainable. It's also about transparency in the supply chain. You want to see your products being made? Come look, Take a 2-hour flight, not 18 hours or 27 hours to go to some rural province in China to do it. Are you paying a sustainable wage? Are you providing a good work environment? Are the people that, are they happy, healthy, and going home from a good days of work, and they can take care of their families, provide for their families, and then help build a community? That's sustainable too, right? And that's important.
It's one of the 3 pillars, certainly.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So, and I think, how you treat your people and just having that whole piece of it is important factor. So when we message that with the brands and talk about that, they totally buy in, because it's not, of course we're going to work with domestic suppliers and help, the infrastructure building, organic, climate beneficial wool and things like that. Great, and find organic raw materials. It's not just that though. I think the consumers and the brands are demanding more, and that's what we can deliver on. And we, to that point, have a very robust communication and PR strategy to kind of get the word out. A lot of brands we talk about, yes, take a video of how your product's being made. Put us in your marketing materials. We're welcome. It's
a good story.
Right. So.
You are using a technology and the infrastructure that you've built to host that technology,
Right.
being more green, and that is absolutely what consumers are wanting and brands are wanting.
Right.
So that makes you a really wonderful partner. And
I think the one thing that I guess from a personal standpoint too, that John and I are very proud of is that, we're kind of changing the idea of what made in the USA means, right? And, we all want made in the USA. It makes us feel good, right? And I grew up in Michigan. My dad worked for the car industry for 37 years. Like, I still, drive an American-made car, right? Just because it's in my DNA. So, but that just can't be what it's all about. We want to reinvent, reignite, reinvigorate what U.S. manufacturing looks like, regardless of the category. And there's a lot of companies out there doing that. But in apparel, no one's doing it, right? So we're really kind of want to be one of those thought leaders and saying, how do we reinvent what manufacturing looks like in U.S. manufacturing and really feel good about being made in the USA? It's not just this Americana, nostalgic. It's about future made in the USA.
Well, thank you, Jon. What a tremendous perspective you have shared, and I'm really excited to see the growth of your manufacturing, and I love seeing all of these layers come together. What is it you said? .com, .edu?
.gov, .org, and .edu. All
Yes.
So
together.
smooth. And so true.
That's so
Yes.
true. Yeah. Well, listen, thank you for having me. I would always like to talk about this. Like I said, I could talk about this for hours. We're here, we're getting to the point of post-COVID here, hopefully pretty soon. Come visit us, world. We love to do tours and talk about what we're doing, and we like to make stuff, so.
And I can definitely attest to the fact that it is absolutely worth the tour. So if you are interested on hopping on a plane, I absolutely recommend that you visit the Johns at Evolution St. Louis.
What's your website, Jon?
www.evolutionstlouis.com.
Great.
EvolutionSTL.com.
This conversation is a good segue for another conversation we have coming out soon, where we're going to be talking further about sustainability and the viability of sustainability in fashion. So make sure to subscribe so you can stay apprised of more episodes of Clothing Culture.